In the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, we do not have to become heroes overnight, just one step at a time, meeting each thing that comes up, seeing it not as dreadful as it appears, but discovering that we have the strength to stare it down. She said, be confident, not certain. The purpose of life is to live it, to taste experience to the utmost, to reach out eagerly and without fear. Her words inspire me to continue this journey with eyes wide open, looking for opportunity, for challenge, and for connection. Along this adventure, we must also listen and collaborate amongst unalike minds and perspectives, sharing those opportunities, learning from those challenges, and cultivating those connections. No one succeeds on this journey alone, and I think it's incredible to look around and see so many women staring down those hurdles, taking it one step at a time, and becoming heroes for a generation to come.
I'm focused. I've been watching for the omens. I've been listening to everything you said. It's been running through my head, locked and loaded. I got the feeling that you know it. Yeah, I've only just begun. I won't stop until it's done, till you're broken. So welcome to the fire. I'm the one with the lighter. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. So welcome to the fire. Welcome to the fire. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. So welcome to the fire. I've been waiting for this moment, the final battle of the chosen. See, I'm never gonna quit, got my legacy set in motion. So welcome to the fire. I'm the one with the lighter. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. So welcome to the fire. Welcome to the fire. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. Welcome to the fire. Welcome to the fire. 'Cause the bigger they are, the harder they fall. You build your fortress and I'll climb your walls. You got your armor, but I see your flaws. So welcome to the fire. I'm the one with the lighter. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. So welcome to the fire. Welcome to the fire. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. Bigger they are, the harder they fall.
We stood in lines and raised our right hands, and then all of a sudden, we weren't kids anymore. It's not that we grew up, we just knew we had to be different now. When they say repeat after me and you state your name, it sounds like a mess. A bunch of voices saying their names at the same time, all proud of who they are. By the end of the oath, you're one voice, all proud of what you share. The oath is our bond that brings us together. we solemnly swore that we would support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Maybe a lot of us had never even read the Constitution, but that piece of paper we swore to defend spelled out everything America was capable of. The greatness that was yet to come. Freedoms, rights, powers, duties, responsibilities. That's what we were defending. And now, you've taken that oath. You swore to do what was required of you. What is required will be more than you thought you had. You will be given boundaries and borders, but you will also be shown horizons. Your duty is to achieve the impossible. Your orders are to conquer fears, do things we couldn't dream of. Your orders are not to live up to some romantic idea of what we were, or to drag our memory with you like a weight. Your orders are to let us carry you to places we couldn't find. Your duty is to your country. The oath is not a limitation. It's a starting gun. You have not sworn to do what so many brave men and women have done before. You've sworn to do what no one has done before. Do not repeat after us. Do better.
I am American Airman. I am a warrior. I have answered my nation's call. I am an American Airman. My mission is to fly, fight, and win. I am an American Airman, wingman, leader, warrior. I will never leave an airman behind. I will never falter, and I will not fail.
All right, here we go. This is looking a little different, but welcome back to the Back and Forth Air Force Recruiting Services only live stream. Things look a little different today. I am joining from gorgeous Colorado Springs in my lovely hotel room, and Sergeant Dosky's holding it down at the fort for me. So I'm probably going to turn a lot of things over to him today because he's got the good mic and the good headphones and the good internet. So we're going to try to avoid going close on my face. But today's show is full of firsts. This is the first show we've done in September, right? So that's an easy first. It is the first show we've done about the Air Force birthday, which just so happens to be in September. It's later on this month, and it will be 76 years. But this is the first show we've done without Major Lane from the background in the background. So bear with us as we kind of work our way through the learning curve. Make sure to comment down below throughout the show and let us know what we're doing well still, what we can do better on, and that'll keep us relevant and awesome for you guys. As you guys all know, I am Tech Sergeant Greg Cerny.
And I'm Master Sergeant Devin Dosky. I'll take it from here.
Perfect.
I appreciate Cerny. I'm here representing the Air National Guard today, so any questions about the ANG, let us know. We had a little picture fall down for our intro here with you. I'm here and things are falling, Cerny, so, but I appreciate it. We'll get through it and it'll be good. So take it from here, Cerny.
Yeah, man. So Air Force birthday, 76 years. We have the bragging rights now of not being the youngest force because Space Force is now here. So we get to kick off that title and put that trophy on the shelf and see how much dust it gets before somebody else comes along and relieves Space Force of it. But in the past 76 years, Air Force has done some incredible things. And joining us today, we've actually got a panel of historians, which Sergeant Dosky is going to introduce here in a minute. And there they are on the screen. They're going to share their words of wisdom, their experience, and all the things they know about all things Air Force and tell us why it is super cool to be part of this amazing organization. So why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Gary Boyd. I'm the director of AETC, Air Education and Training Command's History Museum program here at Randolph. So glad to be here. 40 years in the Air Force and most of that time as a historian.
Awesome.
Yeah. Cool. And I'm Rudy Purificato. I'm an Air Force historian with Air Education and Training Command, and I'm a former Army historian. And I've been spending this month is my 40th year in the Air Force and civil service.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jill Hopkins. I'm an intel officer by trade, but I'm lucky enough to have been sent to school by the Air Force to become a branded PhD historian. So I moonlight in this area.
A brand PhD historian. So, how did you get that degree? What does one do to get that degree?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I stumbled into it. The Air Force is extremely big into education. If it's not something that's been talked about in this show before, I can't say it often enough. You know, one thing that we do as a service is we value the education of our airmen and our officers. Everything from an associate's degree all the way up to a PhD. So I found myself at one point after having gotten a master's degree at an Air Force university. I was then asked to teach. And while I was teaching, I loved it so much, they asked if I was interested in going to get a history degree. So I spent 2017 to 2020 as a full-time student at Florida State University, go Noles. And it was fantastic. I got the hat, I got the robes, I got everything. So when I say branded historian, I mean the real deal.
That's really cool. So I won't necessarily say that's a silver lining because I don't think any part of having Major Lane from the background not with the show anymore is all right. Wes, you want to change that shot? The best thing about him, like he would always do this thing during the show where he would take any opportunity he ever had to say, "Go Dogs," because he's a Georgia alum, right? And I was almost glad because I wouldn't have to deal with that anymore. But here you are giving shout outs to your alma mater, which I wholeheartedly support. And then I realized in the whole meantime, like it's not gone. We have the love of that education, right? And also here I am saying "Go Dogs" on air for Major Lane in his absence. And I'm not even a college ball fan. But anybody who's watched this, he did it like 5 or 6 shows in a row where he found a way to slip it in, and it was hilarious. It was a good time. So that's really cool, though, that the Air Force hooked you up with that education, and it's really cool that they value the education of our airmen and our officers and everybody in the service. So that's really cool. So I noticed that there's a background there. Sarandowski, are you replacing me? I see somebody else is in my spot. Gary's holding my seat down.
Yeah, I got Gary Boyd next to me, but in the studio with you being gone. But you are in the right location. You're out there in Colorado Springs, and with celebrating 76 years of air power, where Colorado Springs is home of our academy. So it's the kickoff football season too. September, did some fantasy league drafting this weekend, preparing for the NFL to kick off. College kicked off this weekend, but with that, and now we got the historians in the room, and then down the hall, we can talk about, the Air Force Academy's alternate uniform this year. We got the Doolittle Raider jerseys and helmets coming out, so if you get a chance, go check it out. They look pretty sweet. Nice chrome backgrounds, got featuring the B-25 bomber, and then certain nicknames of the planes that took part in those the Doolittle raids. So with that, we'll dive into, like I said before, 76 years of air power. We got the experts in the building today. So let's kick it off and go to the Q&A. How does that sound?
Man, I love it. So as you guys know, out there joining us on the big wide world of the internets, keep your comments coming through. We can see them down there in the chat. Put a Q before your comment so we know it's a question, and we'll siphon those out and we'll set them aside for when we get back to the back and forth section of the show in probably 15 minutes or so. But keep them coming in, and we'll start throwing them up on the screen the way we always do. But before we get started with that stuff, I actually have a question, and I'll pose it to our 3 guests. Anybody can take this one. Is something like being a historian for, really, honestly, whatever organization or background, is that something that you want to do from like childhood, or is that like an acquired taste where as you grow up, you sort of understand that tradition and history are so important to who we are and where we've been and kind of, help us navigate where we're going? Is that something that spans a lifetime and passion, or is that something that you develop?
I'll take this one because I did this instead of math. That's one of the reasons I'm a historian, I think, and was not good at math. Let me put it that way as well. But no, I've always loved the Air Force, and I've always loved Air Force history. And I can't remember a time in my school age years where I wasn't doing that instead of probably some of the other required readings. So My recommendation is that you have to have a passion for whatever you do. And so many of us in the Air Force have a passion for the history. So keep that in mind. I know that becoming an Air Force historian is something that anybody can do if they have a little bit of a background in college. 18 hours of history is required. A BA in history is the very minimum. And what we're looking for historians are people with a passion for it, who will grow with us, and who are anxious to write about what's happening out there in the world. I mean, it's such an honor to be able to honor and memorialize some of the great things and great people in the Air Force. The Air Force really is people, and so I've never looked back at it. I came in as an enlisted historian because it used to be like the band. You came in. In fact, I graduated from the University of Kansas Rock Chalk. I'll say that right now for Colonel Hopkins. But I came into basic training, and I didn't get the chance to walk down the hill at Kansas because the recruiters had me go right straight to BMT. And from BMT, I became a medical administrator, and I didn't realize my history degree would had any type of Air Force AFSC background, but it did, and I was able to cross-train on my first tour, and I stayed with the Air Force history program since 1988 and have not looked back. Today it's all civilian, but I want you to know the best way to get into the Air Force is, the Air Force history program is get into the Air Force. Join the Air Force, get your eligibilities for your VA, finish your bachelor's, master's degree. PhD is nice, and it's not required. But if you do have a PhD, certainly look at us as an alternative. But first of all, bring the passion. If it's something you want to do, if you love air power, and if you love the people who produce air power, this is the right career for you.
That's really cool. So quick question as a follow-up for you. What is the museum program? I see that in your lower third in your title. What's the Air Force or the AETC museum program? Okay,
so we're in charge of the nuts and bolts of history. We're trying to account for everything that happens in Air Education Training Command. That's my suite of responsibilities, and Rudy's as well. But the museum program, these are the heritage artifacts that make up the history of the Air Force. So on Lackland, we have what we call an Airmen Training and Heritage Complex, where we have aircraft on display at the parade field. We have an Airmen Traditions Museum and a Security Forces Annex Museum, where we keep objects of valor and personal heroism and interesting technologies for people to come and visit. And when you come to Lackland to look at BMT graduation, we'll be glad to host you. But the Air Force Museum, the National Museum of the Air Force in Dayton, that's one of the great museums in the world that has all the objects and uniforms and people that made up Air Force heritage. And that's also a part of what we do. It's as big a part as, say, the history itself. And I think it's maybe a bigger part of recruiting because people want to come and see and enjoy what the Air Force has done. And they also want to know what their parents and grandparents did when they were in the Air Force. So we're able to give you the full experience there.
Speaking of that, Gary.
That's really cool.
Air Education and Training Command came before Air Force Recruiting Service. Can you just tell me how that works?
For recruiting, the Army, of course, we were also part of the Army. I say we as the Air Force, and I don't think anybody's going to correct me on that. But the Army had control of recruiting at the end of World War II, and until 1954, it was almost solitarily done through the Army. In fact, we had to ask for permission to go places. The Army would take some of the best recruiting locations, surprise, surprise. And so we had to really stand up for ourselves. The idea that the Air Force needed its own recruiting service was something everybody knew, and it happened in '54. And by 1959, it became a 3,400th recruiting wing. But then in 1959, it became the recruiting service, which we know today. So, like AETC, the recruiting service is as old or older than the Air Force, but its actual birthday is a little bit newer than you might have thought.
That's really cool. So I actually want to kick this over to Rudy and Colonel Hopkins. Do either one of you have a story that you can remember from a young age that ties into what you do now and how that kind of came to fruition?
Well, yeah, I would like to step in. It's a really interesting story. As a young 18-year-old man from New York City, and I was recruited to go to Texas Christian University. The Vietnam War was going on, and my draft number was pretty low. And so I went to TCU, and just like Gary, I was not good at math. So I was taking a lot of history electives at TCU as a journalism major. I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. And I was kept taking a lot of electives in history, and I finally decided I was going to take the hardest courses available, which is British history. And it was really a life-changing experience for me. It led to where I am now today. Dr. Marguerite Potter, who's the department chair of history, taught the toughest course, British history, and I was taking her class. And the first day of class, she said, "I don't give any A's." So, okay, it was a challenge. I got an A, and I took her second half of British history and was getting an A again. And at the very end of that course, she was the one was leaving the class, and she said, "Rudy, I want to see you in my office." And I went to her. I said, "Oh boy, I'm in trouble now. The department chair wants to see me." She closes the door. She looks at me. She asks, "What is your major?" And I said, "Well, Dr. Potter, I'm a journalism major." And she looked at me and she said one thing. She said, "I suggest you change it to history." So apparently she saw something in me that I have a talent for history. I've always loved history. And so I changed. I went to the registrar's office. I made a double major. And I got a double degree, undergraduate in history and journalism, which led later on when I went to the Army. I became an Army historian. But really more importantly, when I transferred to the Air Force as an Air Force civilian, I was at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio. And the base was a BRAC base, and I was writing all kinds of history stories. I was in public affairs for quite a long time, and they decided they need to have a historian to close out history of the base. It was a BRAC base, and they asked me if I was interested, and minimum requirements, as Gary was mentioning, was at least a bachelor's degree in history, and I had it. And bingo, I became an Air Force historian, and to echo what the Colonel mentioned about opportunities, that led to me going into the Air Force History Program in 2008. And then I applied as the second Air Force civilian historian to go to Air Command and Staff College to get a master's degree. They paid for it. So it all led to that. It's been a great experience. And I have had a great opportunity to tell the Air Force story as an Air Force historian.
That's cool. That's cool. So I'm seeing a common trend with not being great at math and being great at history, following through to allowing you to become a historian. So here's where I'm trying to figure out as my own personal dilemma. I was not great at math and I was not great at history. Am I just out of luck?
That's why
because
we're PAs,
there you go.
That's why we're both PAs.
That's why we're PAs. That's why we're PAs. That's the American flag side. I do the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Your turn to come up with a question, because I realized that my paperwork that I brought with me doesn't have the questions on there, and I had the childhood one lined up.
I want to
so
bring the
all
Lieutenant
you.
Colonel in here. If you want to share a little bit of your story, but also why September 18th? Why is that the Air Force birthday? And then does that include all components of the Air Force, Air Reserve, and the Air National Guard?
Okay, so a little bit of my personal story. I have to throw this out there. I did my undergrad at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, so go Falcons, got to do it. And I had a minor in history, mostly because I found it interesting. You know, when I grew up, my dad was always very interested in history, so he drugged me around to every Civil War battlefield we could find in the area. And I just thought it was neat, that it was fascinating. And when I got to college, I decided, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do a minor in history, never really thinking a whole lot about it. But what it did, interestingly enough, was made me very well prepared for my normal day job, which is an intelligence officer, because intelligence work is primarily, understanding what happened so that you can try to understand what's going to happen, right? And so it's very closely related to the storytelling that we do as historians, because that's really what it's about. You mentioned you're not good at history. I disagree. You're a good storyteller, and that's really what a historian is. Anyone can Google the facts, but they can't always give the narrative, and that's where the tough piece lies. So when you ask about, why September 18th, well, We talked a little bit earlier about how the Air Force kind of broke away from the Army in a large part because we had a new and exciting, we call it domain, right? So just a different way of fighting, essentially, because that's what the military is there for, right? We're there to fight on behalf of our nation when asked to, and to project a certain amount of power and capability in the meantime, right? And so, in order to do that, we part of what we had to do when the split came about had to do with the National Security Act of 1947. And so when you ask, okay, is the Air Force the same as the Air National Guard, as the Air Force Reserve? Yes and no, quite frankly. It all depends on all these different legal capabilities or legal who's paying the bills, essentially. But at the end of the day, we're all airmen and we're all interchangeable. You can't tell the difference between a guardsman and a reservist when you are out and about unless you ask the question, or maybe it's a patch on their shoulder. It just depends, right? But we all have that same service and that same need to kind of serve our nation and pull forward. So I think you asked a little bit about like why is history important, to the Air Force in this particular case. Well, it's in my personal opinion. I'll just throw that out there. I think it's important because you join a service because you want to be part of something bigger. That's really what it comes down to, right? And knowing your history and knowing where you come from helps to draw that connection back to the airmen that came before you. And so that's why I think history is so terribly important when it comes to military service. Not just because we need to understand what happened so that we can do better in the future, but also so that we can understand who we are as airmen writ large. Did I answer your question, or did I ramble too much?
No, that's great. I love that. So I'm seeing, I'll do this real quick. I'm seeing a bunch of comments come through. Yes, I know we're early. It's not the 18th yet. We've got a little while to go before we get to that point. I get it. But the way we schedule these shows out is a lot of advance, and there's a ton of coordination to get our guests on here. I mean, these guys have full-time jobs, and getting them to break away from that for an entire afternoon sometimes doesn't line up exactly on the date. So bear with us as we work as hard as we can to make sure that it's at least relevant. So we figured the first show in September's our birth month. That's what we're doing. So my question, and anybody can take this one. I'm also seeing here, and I also see in our script, it says happy birthday, Air Force and Air National Guard. What's the deal with reserves? Because I know reserves is a little different there. Can somebody talk to that and tell me why it's not happy birthday to all three, and what the difference is for the birthday for the reserves?
I'll speak to that a little bit. The Guard obviously predates everybody, and of course they work for the governor. And there was something called the Continental Air Command and Air Defense Command in the 40s and 50s, and a lot of what we would call TFI units, the Total Force, integration units, were assigned to them, including the reserve and the Guard components. They're older than their actual Air Force dates. The Air Force made the Reserve Command Major Command in 1997, and now, the National Guard, of course, answers the National Guard Bureau, but there is a direct reporting unit, is the Air Force, or Air National Guard Readiness Center, which was created in the 70s to help the Air Force integrate those TFI mission in total. And so they got different birthdays and are equally important, but like Colonel Hopkins says, they're completely integrated into our lives now. You can't go onto any Air Force base and not see a guardsman or a reservist doing the same job that active duty are doing. We just can't live without it. We're not resourced at a level where we were in the 50s, where you had 800,000 people who you could call upon to come into the Air Force. Now we have to draw upon reservists and guardsmen at a time when they can serve and we need them to serve. So it's a total force, and I think we all celebrate that 18 September, 47 anniversary together, but we also know that the missions are a lot longer and a lot older than that. And honestly, I like to celebrate August 1st, 1907, when the Aeronautical Division of the Signal Corps, Army Signal Corps was originally activated. It goes back that far, but you could go further back to, the Army Balloon Corps and things like that. So with history, you always have to be continuously in a mind of a revision. But 47 is good, and 76 years is good, and we're all part of the same team. And like I say, you're not going to find much of a difference between a guardsman or reservist, and that's changed. When I came in '85, I don't think we relied nearly as much or as professionally on the Guard Reserve. A lot of that changed during Desert Storm when they performed really miraculously alongside their brethren on active duty. And since that point, there hasn't really been many delinkings because the Air Force has been very busy since 1991. We've pretty much been a deployment Air Force since that point. So the modern period of Air Force history I look at is 91 on. And, but everything that has contributed to today is something that a historian is supposed to be responsible for. So I'm very in tune with that and very, very aware of that. I get asked all the time about history questions in a book that somebody has just read. So we have to be ready for continuous quizzing as well. But I hope that answers the question. And I will admit that I probably did drone on a bit.
You're good.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Trust me, we'll get on to you later in the show when we do the lightning round at the end, where we try to see how fast we can actually get questions done.
Yeah.
But we'll get there later. For right now, it's just, history is not a quick thing. It takes a long time to learn. And honestly, sometimes it takes a while to tell the story because in order to do it justice, you do have to actually go into detail. So while it does sometimes sound like droning, there's a reason that, any kind of college course, you've got speeches and lectures that go on for hours because the information is in there and you have to know it. So pop quiz, as you're talking about your constant quest for quizzing and stuff like that. December 20th, 2019, go. No, nobody? December 20th, 2019. Why is that date?
Space Force
There it is.
for 300, Alex.
There you go. Perfect. All right. I'm done with my stupid
October.
questions. I'll turn it over to Sardosky.
Yeah, with that, we had the Space Force emergence and everything. What would you say, I'll open up to our experts here, like some of the major milestones in our Air Force history, while now being Space Force activation is a huge one, but, since 1947, what would you say some of the major milestones have been in air power?
For me, one of the biggest milestones, and because I'm the Air Education and Training Command historian, I think I'm more attuned to this, but I think the biggest milestone was the ability to turn a corner and train hundreds of thousands of pilots after only doing dozens or hundreds up to the point of 1939. There's a picture that we have over at our museum of Hap Arnold talking to 10 acres of cadets, and these are all aviation cadets that came to San Antonio to learn to fly or to become aircrew. And it's a war-winning photograph. Everyone in that photograph, they became part of the 10th Air Force, the 8th Air Force, the 9th Air Force, and they went to all parts of the world, and they won World War II. The photo's taken in December of '42, and that picture, more than anything else, is like the flag raising in Iwo Jima. We tend to forget how important training is to the end result. And Air Training Command, at that point in time, it starts in '42 itself. We have a January 23rd, 1942 start date, but it had actually, training is the first mission of all the Air Force. But we turned a corner that we never looked back on in World War II. And the fact that we're an independent service and a war-winning service all dates back to that time when Barton Yount and Air Training Command were able to turn a corner and train vast numbers of individuals in all manners of specialties. There was more than 1 million airmen and all AFSCs and specialties, almost 200,000 pilots by the end of World War II. We had an Air Force that was over 100,000 strong, so it was a war-winning Air Force, and it came from almost nothing in a space of a few years. So I look at that as a major turning point. And Colonel Hopkins has got a great background in air mobility and the soft power project in the Air Force, so I won't infringe upon her time there, but I also look at the Berlin airlift as being a critical part. If you think back to Military Airlift Command and Air Mobility Command history, they've never let down the United States or the American people. And so they were able to turn on a dime after the demobilization of World War II and save a nation, which was, West Germany and Berlin at that point. We were very close to maybe an armed conflict at that time. And because the Air Force was so good at what it did logistically, we were able to kind of forestall starving Berlin, and we were able to forestall a larger conflict because I think the Russians saw how professional we were and were somewhat aghast, actually. I think the idea that we were tired from World War II was true, but that America doesn't lose wars is also true. And the American Air Force has always been there to help be the bulwark of democracy and freedom. And that is a key and critical part of our history, too. I'll throw it over to Colonel Hopkins and to Rudy because they are experts on, Rudy's an expert in space. Colonel Hopkins is an expert on air logistics and nickel grass, believe it or not.
Yeah, so I don't want to speak for the group at large, but I think a big part of the milestones that we see in the Air Force and our development has to do with advancements in technology and our ability to project power farther and farther, away, and which is what largely led to the eventual establishment of the Space Force, right? Because we had this, you started off with a very small. I want to say the first Wright brothers plane only flew a couple hundred yards. All the way out to being able to project power to bring to bear some pretty serious hardware, not just in terms of, fighter aircraft or bombers, but also, like what Gary alluded to with our mobility forces. We're the only Air Force in the world that's able to take a large unit of, Army, Marines, Air Force Special Forces, and to put them around the globe in a matter of hours. We're the only ones that can do that, right? And that ability to project power not only as a mainstay of stability for many parts of the world, but also as a ability to show how you can rely on and you can trust in the American support for the long haul, like what we saw in Berlin specifically, is something that our Air Force has a huge role in, right? So we're so much more than fighter aircraft or bombers. What we do, the preponderance of the Air Force is actually more involved in that larger power projection. So I'll flip it over to you to talk about Space Force a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly right. And it's very inspiring. I had an opportunity to brief the first command chief of the Space Force. He came to Randolph. He wanted to see where the ground zero was for the beginning of the Space Force. And the Air Force really was America's Space Force. And I have some photographs I'd like to show you. First of all, what started it all off was a visionary. And I'm going to show you this picture here in a minute. Find it. Dr. Harry Armstrong, who became the second Surgeon General of the United States Air Force. He was a research scientist. And here we go. Okay, there he is. Okay. Dr. Armstrong in 1947, of course, we have the Air Force was created in 1947. And Dr. Armstrong, he became the commandant of the School of Aviation Medicine at Randall Air Force Base. And in 1949, he created the world's first Department of Space Medicine. And what the Colonel was mentioning about, we're not just about rockets and technology, but also some of the contributions to space research was conducted by the Air Force. Very important part of it. And what really motivated me, I actually produced a documentary for the Air Force. It's on YouTube called The Story of Brooks. And one of the episodes on the space age and the contributions of the enlisted airmen contributed greatly to space contributions in the manned space flight program. And what happened in 1949, when he created the Department of Space Medicine at Randolph, they were starting to experiment with different chamber experiments. And this is a picture of, by the way, Mr. Boyd was mentioning about the artifacts at the museum. We maintain the artifacts in our various museums, and one of the artifacts that's in the museum at Lackland, at the Airmen Heritage Museum, is this device called Torella 1. It's a low-pressure chamber built in 1952, and the Air Force scientists at Randolph were conducting all kinds of atmospheric tests to determine different types of gaseous atmospheres for long space travel. And this is 1952. Can you imagine? So in
Wow, that's
1957, the
crazy.
Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the start of the space race. Well, there was no NASA in 1957. So the United States, had to counter this. And of course, it was a great embarrassment. What can we do? And they turned to the United States Air Force because they've been conducting all these experiments. And lo and behold, the scientists at Randolph decided, well, we're going to do something very interesting. We're going to recruit an airman by the name of Donald Farrell. He was from Lackland Air Force Base. He was an accountant. He was from the Bronx, New York, 22 years old. And you have to understand, no human being had been sequestered inside a research chamber for any length of time at all in the history of the world. So Airman Farrell volunteered to be inside this research chamber for 7 days on a simulated trip to the moon. This is February 1958.
Wow.
And he made this journey. It was internationally known. And a fellow by the name, if you recognize this photograph, when it came out, you recognize the guy on the right-hand side. That's Lyndon Johnson. Senator Lyndon Johnson became president of the United States, greeted Donald Farrell. And so that was in February 1958. So in the summer of 58, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration was created as the world's first civil space agency. And guess what the first act that NASA did? They took away the Air Force's Project Mercury, which we were working on. But guess what? Because they didn't have the expertise, they had to rely for the next 30 years on the United States Air Force and Air Force scientists, and primarily a lot of the volunteers, airmen volunteers, to support the manned space flight program. And some of the things I'd like to show you real quick, and I'm so enthusiastic about it because I wanted to, and that's talking about the passion of history, telling stories that to inspire and to create an identity. And I have an opportunity now, and thanks to Mr. Voigt's initiative, we're working with the Space Force to create a curriculum teaching history in the first module for the new space airmen, Guardians. And one of the things that I'm so proud of, because I wanted to tell the story, is the contributions of airmen. This is an airman here holding a monkey. And these airmen were training these primates for space travel. This was Sam Space, named after the School of Aerospace Medicine. And he was one of the first to be launched into suborbital flight in 1959. But these monkeys had to be trained by these airmen. And they had to, here is Sam Space being launched, putting in this little capsule. It's just called a biopack, developed by Air Force scientists, put in the nose cone of a rocket, and he was shot up into suborbital space, followed by his Miss Sam Space. But the reason I bring that up is these airmen were training these primates mostly, and also at Holloman Air Force Base, the space chimps later on, and the contributions they are made. And one other thing, so the program continued on for the next 30 years. The Air Force was supporting the NASA's manned space flight program, developing spacesuits. I conducted these interviews as a historian with some of these airmen who contributed to the program. And one of the programs was developing space food. And they actually sequestered airmen. They would weigh these airmen in before they go into the chamber, and they put them in the chamber and weigh them afterwards, see if they liked the food that was being developed by the Air Force for space. And I talked to one of these airmen. Can you imagine being confined in a research chamber for 54 consecutive days with 3 other guys?
Wow.
So these are some of the sacrifices they made, and they didn't have any psychological tests for these airmen, and they had to go through all this, and then some of the sacrifices made. Unfortunately, some of the dangers associated with the manned space flight program. NASA lost their first astronauts, as you know, in 1967, Apollo 1. The same week, 2 airmen from Harmon and Bartley walked into a research chamber at Brooks Air Force Base, and in 100% oxygen, and they perished in a flash fire. So there's some sacrifices made not just by the NASA, but by our airmen contributing to the manned space flight program. I'm very proud to tell this story. There are more stories to tell. Project Bedrest was another one in 1967. Can you imagine 18 airmen from Lackland Air Force Base volunteering to be in bed for 3 consecutive weeks without moving? The Air Force scientists.
I can think of a couple.
I
can think of some airmen that would definitely do bed for 3 weeks straight.
3 weeks straight. And of course, we had filmed it because the School of Aerospacemen had a TV studio, and they filmed all this. The reason why they did this was they had to mimic microgravity, and the only way to do it for during long duration, they created an analogy. If you're perpendicular to the Earth's surface, like you're in bed, prone in bed, gravity has no effect. And that's the same launch protocols they have for all the launches into space is in a prone position because gravity has no effect.
Okay.
So they put these airmen at Lackland in 18, young, healthy airmen, 19, and they volunteered, and they had to be picked up to go to the bathroom. They could not move. So the first week, they developed muscle atrophy. The second week, everyone was shocked. They started developing osteoporosis, which is a condition related to older women. And the scientists came up with an idea to try to reverse this. Exercise. And of course, NASA picked that up, exercise in space, to reverse the effects of long duration exposure to microgravity. But these are some of the stories. There's many, many more. And it's not just related to space medicine, it's aviation technology as well. So I'm very proud to be a historian working in telling these stories, but to create an identity of being proud to serve, not just for the events, but also for the common good. A lot of things were developed by the Air Force scientists and contributed by the Airmen for the greater good. And it's a long story.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's great.
So I'm not gonna lie. So I can absolutely tell your passion. I can tell when someone gets going. And when I feel like, hey, we need to kind of like, let's move to a different topic. But I was like, I'm still fascinated. And also your energy is coming through the story, which is really cool. And I'm not going to lie, at the beginning of the show, I saw the stack of photos and I saw you hold one up and I was like, okay, I wish we had those photos before because we could put them up. But I was wondering how you were going to work those in. And I'm really pleased with the way you did that because I kind of had like a bit of a revelation as you were talking. Being a historian, what it looks like from my perspective is you get paid to do show and tell as a job, which is really cool because that was like one of my favorite things about school was like show and tell. You know more about this thing than other people and you find it so fascinating. You want to bring something that represents it or itself to the class and then spend some time talking about how cool it is and why it's cool. And that's really awesome. I really appreciate that. Those stories are fascinating. It's really cool. So we have gone enough into the show where it's just us. I think it's time to unleash the floodgates and let all of the comments come in from the comments section. I'm watching them come through. We've seen plenty of great ones come through. So let's go ahead and get to the part of the show where we do the back and forth with the audience out there at large. If you have any questions that we do not get to today, scan that QR code, call that 1-800 number, or go to airforce.com. There are tons and tons and tons of resources on there. They can do everything from get you in touch with a recruiter who can answer your specific recruiting questions. And they also can answer your questions that you have on the show. We also have moderators in the chats on every single one of our social media platforms that will be helping answer some of the questions as well. So keep those questions coming. If we throw them up on the screen, we'll do our best to answer them. And if we don't get to them, these are your resources. Take advantage of them. They're there. So let's kick it back to the quad and see our first question. So Dosky, you can take this one.
What do we got first here? So I'm looking at it. Okay, here we go. Of all the historic moments in the Air Force, which stands out the most to you? Your absolute favorite?
Ooh.
I think that's open to our historian experts right there.
Let me take that one. I'll do a personal one and a professional one. Historians also deploy, and so I was a new staff sergeant deploying historian in 1991 when Desert Storm kicked off, and they deployed me in the middle of the war, in the middle of a Scud attack at Dhahran Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And they literally threw us off the C-5. We needed to get off so they could get that aircraft out of there and turn it around and go back. And they offloaded us. They offloaded our kit. And I remember being scared to death. I mean, I'd come from Shepherd Air Force Base. I'd been a historian there for the Shepherd Technical Training Center for my whole career to that point. But I looked up in the sky, and I see these two Langley F-15Cs, and they're burning towards the site of where the Scuds had come from, and they were providing complete air cover and air supremacy for the area, and I immediately felt good. It's hard to say. You go from being scared to like, oh, they've got this, and that one, I looked down, and I had Air Force on my uniform, and I just felt good. I felt like I was where I needed to be, and everything else took over. It was war is a war, but I mean, I never felt overwhelmed again after that point, and I literally had just touched down. Another favorite moment in Air Force history, and this is a kind of a, I think, not unique, but it's certainly something that most of the Air Force aces, I think, have the same story, which is they have the world's best ground crew, the world's best crew chiefs. Tom McGuire, I always wear, I was a McGuire historian for 13 years, and I always wear Pudgy 5 on my tie, and it was for good luck. And he never got to come back to Randolph. He died overseas, so I always feel like that's my one-to-one relationship with him. But his crew chief was named
cool.
Frank. Thanks. His crew chief was named Frank Kish. He never turned back. He flew over 170 hours of combat, and his aircraft from Pudgy 1 to 5 to Eileen Ann, in the airplane in which he was killed, they never had any turnbacks. And the same is true of Bud Anderson. He was, he in fact the oldest living ace today. It talks about his crew chief Otto Heine and others, and how they would spend the entire night getting his aircraft ready to go. In fact, taking it from olive drab paint to natural aluminum using gasoline because they wanted him to have better camouflage and come back with their airplane. But they their love of the mission, their love of the pilot, their love of the aircraft. I mean, that's my favorite in Air Force history. There are several aces that have that same story. Gabreski, McGuire, Anderson, all of them have somebody on the ground and a tale of logistics that have made them who they are, and they all know it's all about teamwork. And so that's kind of my anti-TED talk. The TED talk tends to go into that why somebody is greater than somebody else. Well, the Air Force has always been about the team, and
Sure,
I always like to bring that up because you can't have a Bud Anderson without a crew chief on the ground, a Frank Kish with Tom McGuire, and you can't have a bad day in the Air Force either, because what we do is so important to the nation's history and the nation's welfare that every airman matters. Every airman on every gate around the world has the history of the world in their own hands, and that I like to try and inspire airmen to do as well as they can for that reason. There's some selfishness there, but the reality is you don't really need to prompt an airman too much.
For sure.
Airmen,
I love what you said there. I love what you said there about the fact that every airman at the gate holds the history of the world in their hands. Like, yes, you represent where you came from, but those are the first level of defense against potential
Absolutely.
threats coming onto each installation. And the day that goes by that does not have incident is a good day in history for the Air Force. And the bad ones, they're the ones that are entrusted with the response. So that's powerful stuff. I really like that. Let's throw up another question.
What do we got? The next question here.
Let's see. Who is your
just a reminder,
favorite celebrity or what? Go for it. What's that?
Their favorite celebrity or famous.
You said just a
person.
reminder. I don't want to cut you off.
Just a reminder. Hey, we got the historian experts in here, but we also got here to answer any of your recruiting questions as well. So if you got questions about joining the Reserve, Air Force, Space Force, or National Guard,
we put a recruiter in a box
know.
and we
Yep.
kept him in the background.
We have an expert. The experts are in the building as well, so don't forget that.
All right. Favorite celebrity, famous person in the spotlight through the history that served in the Air Force. Chuck Norris is a solid one.
I'm going to take this one because I just, before I moved down here to Randolph, I was lucky enough to be stationed up in Alaska. And so one of the famous airmen that was up in Alaska was actually Mr. Bob Ross himself. And so,
the artist, Bob Ross.
right. And so I don't know about you all, but during COVID, me and my family took up a lot of Bob Ross-esque painting. And so he seemed to be on repeat at my house just for something to do. But what I loved about him in particular is that he took his time in service. He was from, I want to say, Muncie, Indiana, something like that. At least that's where his show was eventually broadcast from. And he found himself out in the wilds of Alaska, and he used that as inspiration throughout his entire career. If you look at his tiny little trees, every single one of them came from an air base up in Alaska, right? And so He's one of my favorite, though. I'll have to say that Chuck Norris is definitely a very, very, very close second.
I love that one. Have you guys seen the picture? It's I think it's a meme or something. It's a picture of a kid holding a paper airplane, and he's just like, and it has a picture, and like on the top of it, it just says the Air Force before Chuck Norris. I was like, that one's pretty good. But
Pretty good.
so, are you saying that for Bob Ross, his involvement in the Air Force could have potentially been a happy little accident?
I believe it was a happy little accident. I feel like it was something that he did, just to kind of discover the world, right? And he found himself in Alaska,
Yeah.
hung out for a while.
I see Sergeant
and,
Dosky back there, just like, oh man, the
Yep.
cringe is real.
That was incredible, Cerny. That was incredible.
I'm going with it. Although
Listen,
Bob Ross would say
I
there's no
gotta
such thing as
keep,
an accident,
I
right?
gotta keep the dad humor alive and well. So, all right, let's throw open to the question.
What do you think the most impressive aircraft in the Air Force is, and why? Also, this better be about the A-10 or the SR-71.
I don't know. Have you ever heard of the B-52?
B-52.
That's
The
granddaddy boss right there.
Let me say, I when I was in Desert Storm, I was a historian for the A-10s, and I was so impressed with those. Paul Johnson and others. Paul Johnson got the Air Force Cross, and I got to take a picture of him. There's an iconic picture of the A-10 with one of its wings held on by a single spar, and I couldn't believe it at the time. Still can't believe it. And the aircraft were painted green. They were in Euro green, and they weren't in gray. They weren't in desert sand. They were just there, and they were in the Air Force's, bad boy parade. Basically, you want us, come and get us, and they flew a tremendous war. And since that time to today, they keep talking about the end of the A-10, and it'll come at the right time. But I love the fact that it's an underdog, and as a Jayhawk football fan, let me just say that underdogs are some of my favorite things. I like things that outlast expectations and sometimes make an Orange Bowl, maybe once in your lifetime. But the A-10 has been wonderful, and the people who fly it, they're the salt of the earth. I love the crew chiefs, I love their armors, I love the pilots. They're down there helping the whole force, and there's so much more that they can do. And the one thing that they told me that sticks with me to this day is that, you really can't outrun a missile. So you might as well outslug it. And that's one of the things the A-10 was always able to do. So I love the Warthog. So that's my favorite. Other mileage may vary.
Yep. I'm seeing a little bit of Chuck Yeager, and then also some Jimmy Stewart, even though he was Air Corps. Yeah, there it is right there. And then somebody popped up, C5M Super Galaxy. Yeah, the C5 is no joke. Just being near that thing and seeing it move in the air is amazing. It's just like, how does that humongous piece of metal stay airborne? And then flying on them is also crazy.
Then just watching the nose open up so we can get loaded, all the cargo loaded is wild. Watching that, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's throw up another one. And you got to give me a second because my feed comes to me about 2.5 to 3 seconds late. So, that's why when I'm commenting or saying something, it's probably like right off of the social cue. It's not my fault. It's the internet. Recruiting question. I broke my collarbone in high school and had to have it repaired with a plate and screws. I was able to get back to 100% and bring it back for me. Mobility and range of motion, and was cleared to play contact sports. Is this something that will prohibit me from joining, or would I be okay since I have no limitations? Also, SR-71 is by far best aircraft out there. Thanks, Josh. And I think we should turn this one over to our recruiter in the box. But I would say if you got mobility and range of motion, things are looking good for you. Recruiter in the box.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know I was live. So I was waiting for them to hit the mic button or something.
All you.
Yeah, a question like that, actually very simple. So if you're okay, you have no issues with motion, and even sometimes if you have like a little bit of range of motion issues, it's not really an issue. All that needs to happen is when you go into the recruiting office, you bring that information up to your recruiter. He'll document it on your 2807, I believe is the name of the form, which is your medical pre-screening history. They send it down to the doctors at MEPS. They verify that the information is going to be good against there's a DOTI instruction. And when you go down there, they verify that it is what it is. And if it's no issue, then you're good.
There you go. And as we almost always say on every version of this show, the most important thing and first step is talk to your recruiter. So go talk to a recruiter. They will get you pointed in the right direction. And most of the time, I joined with 13 stitches in my right shoulder. Obviously, they weren't in still, but I had a fractured shoulder blade and a dislocated shoulder and 13 stitches from a motorcycle accident. And obviously, my recruiter was alarmed and was like, "Can you still do push-ups?" And I was like, "Yes, of course I can do push-ups." And he's like, "Okay, do 20 push-ups." And so as long as you can do the range of motion tests that they have for you, and you can provide a strength test example, and you can pass all of the requirements that they've got, then yeah, I mean, you absolutely can still join with a pre-existing injury as long as you are still able to complete the tasks that are required. Next.
What do we got next, Wes? Here we go. Let me take it? Okay. Basically, hello.
Yeah,
Chief
we
Master
take turns.
Sergeant
You're up.
Wingen Matthew, a cadet at Dixie Air Force Junior ROTC, UT 2006. My question is, would I still be able to join the Air Force with ADHD and autism?
Okay, yeah. So this one's definitely a little bit
depends.
more. It does depend, and it's a little bit more of an in-depth conversation that, again, you're going to have this with your recruiter. Now, typically, the defining line is whether or not you actually need medication. Now, obviously, that's going to be determined by the CMO, the Chief Medical Officers at MEPS, and they're going to take that information and send it to the Surgeon General here at the Air Force headquarters. But that's where they make that determination, and it depends on how bad it is, and it just kind of goes from there. I know that's not a direct answer, and I apologize for it not being a direct answer, but it's a case-by-case situation. Does that answer that question?
Some of these are going to be black and white, yes and no questions and answers, and we can give you those. But a lot of times, because it's such a variable, and they don't know to what extent your ADHD and autism are, then that's something that they're going to have to investigate. And like Sergeant Keating said, case by case. And then, yeah, the medication is the big one. Because I know for ADHD, what is it, like Adderall, you can't have taken Adderall for 24 months or something like that, and then you have to get a clearance. Is that right?
Yeah, it's usually about 2 years you have to be off the medications is what I remember seeing in some of the instructions.
Cool. Yeah. So talk to a recruiter. There's more information there, but don't let having ADHD and autism prevent you from at least going and asking the question. For sure.
We got another question.
Next question.
A recruiter in the box. Should I make weight before visiting a recruiter?
Okay, that's going to be another open-ended one. My first follow-on question, that is, how close are we? If you come to my office and you're only 1 or 2 pounds away from the weight requirements, which is established, then I'm going to go through a couple of the steps, and we're going to find out if you're even ready for the ASVAB. That way we can put you on some sort of training regimen, and that's what I would do when I was a recruiter out there in the field, is I would, again, case-by-case basis in that situation. And then another thing is sometimes if you're overweight, if you're like really athletic and you have like 11% body fat index, you might actually be just fine. So it's one of those things where we could be able to get a tape measurement performed by like a local organization, like a local fitness center or something, just to find out if it's overweight because of, you know, excessiveness, or if it's overweight based off of just lifting a lot of weights. Because I've put people in the Air Force and they've shipped off to basic training just fine being overweight, but he was a pro football player, basically. So. Yeah.
Another thing also is keep in mind, it's a good idea to go talk to, if you're thinking about it, go talk to your recruiter, because if you are, let's say, 20 pounds away from where your recruiter is comfortable sending you and you got to lose some weight, it's not the end of the world. They have programs that they can help point you in the direction of that'll help you lose that weight. But also it's a really important thing that just in case there is something in your medical or your background that comes back and is a disqualifying factor, it would be a shame if you had your sights set on joining and you lost a bunch of weight before ever going and talking to a recruiter, walked into the office and found out that you were disqualified for something else. That'd be really defeating. And it's a good idea to get all the answers and you can also have the chance to attack multiple issues at once. You can be doing your weight loss stuff while you go track down, you know, medical records and stuff like that. So talk to the recruiter sooner than later, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that the homework assignments they're going to give you and a bunch of stuff that you have to bring in. So also I saw that Matthew said he doesn't need medication anymore. So that sounds like something you definitely need to go talk to a recruiter on, because it sounds like if you're managing that without medication and the CMO, the chief medical officer, can basically sign off for you, things are looking pretty good for you. So get on airforce.com. There's a feature called the recruiter locator, and you can punch in by like your city or your zip code, and then it'll punch up a map. Just like if you jump on your phone and you punch it into your GPS, it'll pull up all the recruiters near you. It'll have some drop downs for what kind of service you're interested in, and you select the ones that apply to you, and they'll send you right toward a recruiter that's nearest to you. So check that out. You can also use the Aim High app. I know we have a cool screen for this one. It's actually pretty sweet too. And I think there's a QR code. There's not, but the Aim High app. So get on Android and iOS, download the Aim High app. All that information is there as well. But airforce.com, Aim High app. Those are going to be great resources for you to put you in touch with that recruiter. So, and let's go back to the 4 and do another question.
What do I got up, Wes?
I'm going to take this one. I got to read fast because it takes a second to pop up on my screen.
You got it.
I had an unspecified eating disorder diagnosis when I was 14 years old. No recurrent. Is it possible for me to get a waiver for this? That's another one that's like the ADHD and the autism one. You need to talk to your recruiter. They're probably going to have that looked into, but as long as it's not something that affects you anymore, and Sergeant Keating, as the recruiter in the box, you can back me up on this, but as long as it doesn't recur, yeah, talk to your recruiter. It looks like you probably have a solid chance.
Yeah, you're absolutely on point on that one. But looking over it, I do have some like follow-up questions. It says unspecified. So my first question is, who said you had an eating disorder? Like, is this something that came up by like a doctor's visit? Because you're going to want to retrieve those records. And it's not until we actually have a chance to look at those records and advise you that we can come up with a clear-cut answer. Because unspecified just tells me maybe that was mom and dad said something and it just wasn't actually done at the doctor's office.
Yeah, if it wasn't legitimately a medical diagnosis, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Take it to your recruiter. Those are going to be your specialists. Those are the guys that'll fight the hardest for you. They're going to look into it the most. And real quick on that, when you go in, do not scrape just the bare essentials for your medical records together. Take everything you can, because if they find stuff out later, you will have done a bunch of work for nothing. It's best just to take all the information in so everybody is the best prepared, and just be completely transparent and kind of go with their advice. They're not there to trick you. There's that old adage that, oh, my recruiter lied to me to get me in. It's really not like that. Recruiters, just like Sergeant Keating, like they're out here, that's their job. They've, a lot of times they volunteered to do that. And they're passionate about the Air Force and they want to get more people into it. So trust them. They're good people and they'll hook you up.
Cool. So I got a question for Gary here. You spoke about the importance of these support roles, the logistics of the pilots throughout history. Is there something established to provide the facts of these men and women who were in these support roles and they aided the Tuskegee Airmen?
Absolutely are. And, I guess I'll go back to the nuts and bolts of what a historian does. It's fun talking about the past, and it's fun telling stories. But the nuts and bolts of what we do are accounting for the folks that do the job every day and accounting to Congress and accounting to those folks who pay the bills for our service on who did what to whom, how we did it, what lessons we learned from it. And sticking close by, like General Robinson in AETC, I see his decision-making every day, and we want to try and capture that. With the Tuskegee Airmen, same was true. There was actually a historian that was assigned to those units with the 332nd, and I actually was privileged to meet several Tuskegee Airmen. One of my best friends was George Watson, who passed away just a few years ago in New Jersey. So I just want to say that the most important thing we do is memorialize and capture what has been done for posterity and for the nation. So there's not many of us. And, when you ask the question about 2019, I was actually looking back through my Rolodex mentally and thinking about the preliminaries to COVID and some of the studies that we were doing looking at pandemics prior to COVID being declared a pandemic. So I wasn't even on the Space Command vibe at all, because the truth is the Air Force historian is assigned to a unit and is nestled in that unit and is trying to learn as many lessons as they can and capture as much as they can from that unit. So it's a real honor to be a historian, and you get to step outside of that arena occasionally, like here, and talk about some of your favorite parts of Air Force history. But the reality is every day I go back in thinking about how to make Air Education and Training Command better, how to operationalize some of the lessons that we've learned in the past to make General Robinson's and General Sears's life easier. So with the Tuskegee Airmen, though, wow. Somebody had asked on the feed, what's one of the great moments, kind of iconic moments in Air Force history that kind of defines the branch? Well, I'm proudest of the fact that the Air Force was the first service to integrate fully. I'm proud of what our black airmen were able to do in World War II with the Tuskegee Airmen, but I'm proudest of all the fact that we kind of became a colorblind Air Force faster than most. I'm proud of the trailblazing women who started to fly fighter planes, and it just seems like a natural course of events in Air Force history that everybody is going to get their opportunity to serve, and everybody's service is valued. And I'm happy to be a historian at this moment in time where it's more inclusive and a more of a total force than ever. And when I turn over my non-math making pencils to my successor, I think that person will be serving in the best Air Force of all time. Because the truth is, there's not a greatest generation. The greatest generation of the Air Force has to be today. It's like we were talking about. You can't have a bad day, and history could end if we do. So it's more important that we continually focus on what's coming up. And with history, it's great to memorialize what's happened, but I have so much faith in the airmen of tomorrow. And the best way to become a historian is to become an airman, and never give up on that idea. And I know that watching General Robinson, they're looking every day at medical waivers and all the other processes to make it easier for people who want to serve. So barriers to service are coming down. So that's my little proselytization there as a historian.
Sure, no, that's valid, and I like what you said there. If you want to become a historian, become an airman first, and there are opportunities to make it both happen. So that's really cool. All right, so that next question up there.
Question.
Is there anything a cyber patriot could do in the Air Force? I know we're going to walk on each other as long as this delay happens, because I start talking and I'm like, here he comes. And I even and I'm just like, oh, whatever. Okay, so cyber patriot person could do in the Air Force. I like how you put that, cyber patriot person. Is that like somebody with an American flag and a computer? But I would imagine that it means something in the lane of like cyber operations. Go for it, yeah.
Okay, yeah. First question is, it's going to be what is in your skill set? Because the Air Force and the Space Force are both absolutely looking for individuals with a C+ programming skill sets, network security. We're looking for individuals that can maybe program in Python. So with whatever certifications that you bring to the table, we can definitely look into those and help place you into the right career. On top of that, we also have a cyber direct commissioning page on airforce.com that just launched this month. So if they're looking for commissioning opportunities and they have the skill sets and they have the degrees and the prerequisites that match that, they can absolutely look into that program as well.
That's awesome.
Sir.
All right, next question.
This one's mine, Cerny. Called it. Can you take the CLEP exam to earn college credits to join as an officer instead of attending college to join earlier?
I believe so, as long as you have your degree. I mean, you can take the CLEPs to get your CCAF, and use CCAF to go through like the ABC program, and there's probably other paths to this. I'm just thinking of one that I would try and push. But once you go through the ABC Associates to Bachelor's Cooperative Program, you have your bachelor's degree, then you can apply for OTS. And during service, you can actually apply for, there's like ROTC paths as well. So I would assume yes on that one.
Cool. Perfect. Next question. Keying in. Okay. Sorry. Keying in on. Whoa. Okay. There we go.
We got
Wendy says, is this being recorded? I'm doing a study on this topic and would like to hear the whole discussion. Would I be able to speak with a member of the panel? Yes, this is being recorded, and it will be hosted on YouTube, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. So feel free to go ahead and use any information from the show for your research topic. That's really cool that you're going to use this as a resource. Feel free to claim us as on your cited works. We are the only Air Force recruiting service back and forth or live stream. It's called the Back and Forth. It's awesome. And it's every 2 weeks and all that stuff. But anyway, you can go and find it, as well as all of our past shows that we've done. I think this is like 15 or 16. So we've actually been doing this for a hot minute, which is kind of cool. We're going to keep our guests to ourselves. We're not going to give anybody's private information. They're already busy enough as it is, but use this show as an opportunity to tap into our guests. If you have questions, throw them in there. We'll answer them when we can. I did want to take a moment and also just make a quick note. I saw a comment earlier in the show, and I kind of was really hoping that we would pop it up, but it's buried way back up there. But I saw someone that said it would be great if we could shine light on the process that we have come to learn as far as making, historically, we haven't done the greatest at making progress when it comes to recovery from issues that we haven't been able to fix in the military. We've got everything from mental health to sexual assault to struggles that we as an entity have had to deal with. And those are not necessarily the fun part of the history that we know, but they are nevertheless part of that struggle. And any success story in history is never a success story without the lows. And I'm not saying that those lows are needed, but I'm saying that with them, it builds us back stronger. And I think it is really important. And we may not shine the light on them as much as we should, but I know for a fact that no one's shying away from them. We work really, really hard to make the Air Force as diverse, as welcoming, and as efficient as it can be, while still being an arm of the Department of Defense and still keeping our mission to keep our country safe and take the fight to the enemy when we need to. But we've come a long ways, and it's because of history. It's because of what we have learned and what we're willing to do to make the future better. So I wanted to make sure to touch on that. We are doing our best, and we're going to keep getting better. And with that, I'm pretty sure we're about to wrap. Unless somebody cuts me off, I want to say thank you so much to our 3 guests for coming into the studio and joining us today. I know you guys are busy, and taking time out of your schedule and giving us a few hours is extremely appreciated. And it sounds like we have well over 100 years of combined experience from the 3 of you. And that is impressive, and that is extremely appreciated. It's really awesome to see the passion about something. And I'm, like I said earlier in the show, I was not big into history. I don't value it as much as I should, but moments like this and afternoons like this, where I can spend some time sitting down and chat with people who take it as seriously and are as passionate about it as you are, remind me that it's something that's still very, very important. And thank you so much for being on the show. Everybody else out there, we'll be back in 2 weeks, Tuesday, 2:00 Central. And I will actually let you close out the rest of this one, Sergeant Dosky, in case they've gotten last minute throws from the studio over there. If they've got the topic, you could throw that one out there too, because I don't actually have that in front of me. But with that, from Colorado and the home of the Air Force Academy, and I don't know, like 74 degrees outside. I'm going to go outside here shortly. It's been awesome. Sergeant Dosky, over to you.
Appreciate it, Sergeant Cerny. So I'm going to close it out. Wes is going to get that information to me real quick, but I just want to say thank you. This was my first time on it, and part of my Air Force history experience in my career. Side note, I'm going to do my shameless recruiting plug, and that is go to airforce.com, ask the questions away. We got a variety of ways to serve and a lot of benefits, so don't be afraid. Come check us out. And Wes, what is?
Next one will be on waivers.
Waivers.
Boom.
We have waivers coming up. Next one. Perfect.
Sounds like we had a lot of good questions today that'll show up in that next one. So if you ask those questions today that we said, talk to your recruiter, bring all your medical documents, show up in 2 weeks to that show. And I'll be on that one too, but I'll be in the studio. So pop in there and remind us that you were here last time, and we'll give you a little shout out. Make sure to throw your question up on screen, and we'll get some of our medical waivers professionals on that. So, all right. Thank you very much, all. Really appreciate you. Thanks for taking time to show off how awesome, a little show and tell on Air Force history. So love it. All right. We're out of here. Peace.
Thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Back and Forth, brought to you by Headquarters Air Force Recruiting Service. It is a privilege for us to bring you all the information and insider insight into the exciting world of the United States Air Force. Remember, this show is all about you. We want to make sure we're providing you information and answers you need to make an informed decision about your future. So make sure to join us every other Tuesday with your questions, your feedback, and any ideas you have for future episodes. We are all ears. Don't forget to subscribe to our social media channels for even more exciting content. And also visit airforce.com for all the latest information on serving as a Total Force Airman. And with that, until next time, aim high.